know that they're mine.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started so you can get on the
Tree of Life is the one representing Earth?
I'm Drew Hubbell, one of the four sons.
No.
And we have a special guest here today, my mother, Ann Hubbell. She doesn't get up that often, but she was really excited to come this year. And I don't know if some of you might have seen the post this morning, but today is actually the day my dad passed away a year ago. So we're all here in honor of him. So thank you all for being here and supporting the foundation the ways that you have. I'm going to start and talk a little bit about the history and growing up here at Ilan-Lael, and then go through some of the experimental and alternative materials that we've used over the years working with Dad. All of the projects that I'm going to show I did with my father, and except one of them that he did when I was in college. These are a couple of pictures of him in Africa. He spent a year traveling around with young men around Africa. It really influenced his life. Here's a couple of pictures of us at a young age. Can anybody recognize my older brother Tori on the floors? One of the things that my mom really brought to the property, it wouldn't be the same without her and their partnership. She was a musician, still is, but dance. If you put on a piece of music, she will get up and dance. So maybe at the end we'll see it. Here's a couple of pictures. So this was in the 60s. That's kind of a normal family, isn't it, out by your... I think we were doing s'mores in the outdoor fireplace. And that was the bedroom the three of us shared before the boys' house was created. And then here's a couple of pictures of Brennan, my young brother's here. Somewhere, my little brother Tori, and my wife Pam, and Tori's wife Sally are also here. And our son Connor's in the back, scratching his chin. These are some pictures. We grew up working from about the age 4. You can see us mixing cement, moving adobe block. I'm on the top left with my dad plastering the roof of the boys' house. And then here's a picture about 4 or 5 years ago in Del Mar at a Christmas. So that's the whole family except my brother from Lauren from New York, who wasn't out at the time. And then some of the structures that you got to tour around the property. To me, it's a magical place, and it has a different spirit to the land, and the way that my parents, they never cut a tree down or moved a big boulder, so they built around the property. And this was built back in the late 60s. It was the third building, the big studio. When they built it, the neighbors called it, imagine that rising out of the land in the 60s, they called it the Bat Cave. And you do get bats living in it in the summertime. And then the building that they call the Boys' House, we moved into various stages. There was only 2 of us living in it at a time. But Dad wanted a sculptural building that people, or that the boys felt like they were boys, something that opened their imagination. And if you get to spend a lot of time, just a little plug, we have a fundraiser. I don't think it's going on right now, but in the fall, we have an auction and somebody gets to stay in the Boys' House for a weekend. So keep your eyes open for that. Frank Lloyd Wright said about buildings, we derive our substance from the atmosphere of things we live and live within. So that was part of Dan Long's philosophy as well, that the home should be beautiful that we live in. And here's a couple of pictures of some of the magical times of the year. The stained glass, the wheel stained glass in the Boys' House has little prisms in it. So certain times of the year, the prisms will dance all over the room. And the same in the little Kiva gallery down below. And some of the buildings were destroyed or badly damaged in the cedar fire. But the Boys' House, the only thing that was damaged was the stained glass ceiling, which you see on the right there. And they were able to rebuild that. Here's a couple of pictures of the studios. We do get snow sometimes in the winter. It's a completely different feel in wintertime. And then in the springtime, which we're kind of now, it feels like we might be in Ireland right now with everything so green. But if you come in a month, everything is golden, so it's a completely different feel. Dad and I started our practice in 1995, so we're just going on 30 years. I learned to use different materials with my dad, and that opened up the avenues of permitting alternative building materials. So we were the first ones to permit straw bale in '97, and we've done over 40 around Southern California. And then the cedar fire was a big challenge for the foundation. We were able to rebuild. At that time, we turned the buildings over to the foundation in order to accept nonprofit donations to rebuild. And I wanted to say hello to Robin, who's here she was at Cargill at the time, and without Cargill's support, we couldn't have rebuilt these buildings. So we couldn't have built these buildings. And so we had a good friend who lived in La Jolla, Liz Marshall. And our first project, I wanted to design an underwater house for my senior thesis in Arizona, University of Arizona. They said it was too theoretical, so they said do something more like housing, so that's what I did. But when we started our firm, our good friend said, our first commission, I want you to design an underwater house for me in wind and sea. So we put together, she couldn't afford to build it and permits were very difficult, but we put together a great little book for our coffee table book. And so we have one here if you want to look at that after. This is a watercolor rendering of the underwater house. This is a resin model that my dad did here in the studio. And then to make it look real, I did a blueprint with some of the features. Liz Marshall loved butterflies. So you can see there was a butterfly garden. There was a detachable pod where the pod would float to the top to the ocean, and you could sleep out under the stars. And we also had, it was pressurized, so you could swim in, or you could take a car from land, so the dolphins could come and visit you. So really theoretical, but a lot of the technology, we were using accretion, which is a system that they use. They send electrical currents through metal under the ocean networks, and they form coral. So the accretion would form the shell, then we were going to put the windows on the surface and sink it down. So in my mind, it could be built. The only building of these that I didn't work on with my dad was the vent house. So this slideshow isn't really technical, it's really a lot of the fun architecture that we've done over the last 30 years. This one was done about 40 years ago. It's in Del Mar. And the fun part about this one, it's a really indoor-outdoor. But the domes were, we used the technology that came from Arizona. They were balloons. So they inflated the balloons, laid rebar on them, and they sprayed gunite over it. They took the balloons away, and then Dad shaped the forms, and he put the tile on the roof. She does, at least at times, she has Airbnb, but it's a beautiful structure. Here's a couple of the stairs that go up to the rooftop deck, and some of the tile in the living room. Beautiful structure that I really enjoyed. And I was lucky enough to work with a foundation in Escondido. I was supposed to go with the founder over to Uganda, and we were designing a gorilla research station in Buwindi, which is in their national park, because at that time the population was infringing on the forest where the gorillas lived, and they were finding that colds or flus from the people were transferring to the silverback gorillas, so they were creating a hospital. They didn't use our design, but we were able to teach them to use the local materials. They make adobe brick there. They had a corrugated metal roof that they used. So they were able to build this research station and sort of a gorilla hospital where they can treat the gorillas. And what a wonderful experience for me to get to go over and experience that. And then closer to home, Safari Park Zoo in near Escondido, we did about 10 projects with them over the last 15 years. This is my favorite one. It's called the Watering Hole, and it's an outdoor sort of pavilion with a imitation thatch roof, and this a Bilbao tree bar. So you can walk up to the tree, and they have a bar so they have dinners and lunches there, but every time I've gone, they've had an event, because weddings, they said you should rent it for your office, and I said, how much you rent it for? And this was about 5 years ago, $22,000. So weddings, but it's a big fundraiser for the zoo, so that's nice for them. And then down in Tecate, Mexico, Dad designed a Kumeyaay museum. And I believe the foundation, we took tours there last summer. And Joyce was one of the tour guides. She knows Tecate very well. And I believe we're taking at least one day of tours this summer as well. It's a beautiful little structure, but I wanted to show you some of the watercolor renderings that Dad did, and then the clay model. The imagery is a basket like the Kumeyaay used to make. And here's a couple of pictures of the finished. It's a small museum, but it has murals, and we worked with the Tecate, or the Kumeyaay population that's across the border. So it's a little bit different than the Native Americans here. Has beautiful resin panels instead of windows. Very sustainable, all using local materials and local artisans from the area. And then Rancho La Puerta, which is a wonderful health spa in Tecate, run by the Seque family. Sarah Olivia, the daughter of the Seques, commissioned us to design these learning center called Cuchama, which means, and Las Piedras is the nickname they gave it, which means, I believe, broken boulder. So they wanted the structures to look like boulders, and for the children of Baja to come and learn about the environment. So these are some of those boulders. She had an idea of what she wanted to do. Dad had a different idea, so he wasn't involved in the design of the buildings, but he was involved with the stained glass and the doors, and we had a local artisan do these rattlesnake benches where the children, you can see they're given a lecture. And very sustainable, very fire resistive, and the kids really love it, and they do give tours sometimes from Rancho La Puerta. They'll take some of the people up. And then some people call me the straw bale dude, because about 25 years ago we created the first straw bale. This is a picture of one that we've done in Bonita, a large home that's about 5,000 square feet. And you can see the earth and plaster, which is an adobe mix with earth and straw, and then a lime wash over the third one. And a nice tradition with straw bales is something called a truth window. So you can see the bales even when it's finished. They leave a little section of it. So these structures here are using a foam block, but we don't have a truth window, so nobody really knows what it's made of. And then another interesting project, Deer Park Monastery, which is just north of Escondido, founded by Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a really famous Buddhist author that passed away last year. He's written over 80 books on Buddhism. And the nuns, they wanted to build a nunnery there. They have about 30 nuns that stay on the campus along with monks. And they were freezing in little wood sheds in the winter and sweating to death in the summer. So we designed a straw bale house. This is one of Dad's watercolor renderings. And this is some of the nuns putting together the bales, and sometimes you have to tie them to different sizes. And we do a workshop. And one of my favorite things about straw bale is you come together as a group and build it. It's a little bit like an Amish barn raising, where everybody, and some of the larger structures, like the monastery, people come back and say, I did that wall, because they'll put up a section of wall and you sort of take ownership of it. So it's a really fun process. There's a picture of the gardens, and Teo, where's Teo? Teo's up in front. He's a wonderful mason, and he's the one who did a lot of the rock work. So low water use gardens, very sustainable, recycled timbers that we use for the wood. And they love it. We put in air conditioning, but they never use it, never need any heating. And then a very small project we did in Crest, which is just east of El Cajon. It's a little interpretive center. They have an MSCP land park where people can come and hike trails. So this is another watercolor rendering of Dad's. The original design was to have a living roof on the top. The cedar fire came right. The walls were up, it was framed, but the living roof wasn't on, and it burned the structure. So we had to come back and rebuild it. So they decided to go with a plaster roof instead of the living. But these are some of the pictures of the process. The bales in place that we were tarped to keep them dry, and then the earthen plaster, and then some of the finished. And you can see a big lizard bench we did with some of the children. And we worked with Urban Corps on this one, which is training young college-age students to learn how to work with their hands or clear brush or do mosaics. The second straw bale we did in the county was back in the late, I think 98. And this one's unique because it has a giant boulder inside. These first pictures, we did lime wash. We were still learning. It was still hard to get it through the county at that time. And here's a shot of that giant boulder. And they learned, the owners were both psychologists. So they put together a book about 40 pages of program for me, which I can't say I read everything. But they felt that the spirit of the land was that big boulder, and they knew that the Indians had used to cook underneath it. So we designed the whole house around the boulder, and one of the interesting things it does is the thermal mass of the boulder is attached to the earth, so it stays about 62 degrees. They said one night they forgot to close the windows, and it gets pretty cold in Hubbell in the fall, in the 30s. They walked in and the boulder was radiating the heat. Kept the house completely warm even though the windows were open. Very similar to here and what the adobe block does. And then one of the bigger straw bales we've done is the Friends Center. It's in San Diego off of Home Avenue. You can see it above the 15. It was done for the Quaker Church and the Peace Resource Center, 3 nonprofits. They built it almost all with volunteers, very low money that they had. This is a little aerial view watercolor rendering. Here's a shot. We had about 40 people over a week volunteering and coming and putting up the bales. So that's a shot during construction. And then this is a picture of the finished Friend Center. It's one of the more green buildings that we've done. And if you've heard of Green Building Council started a program called the LEED system. This was before they had LEED, but they used it as a testing model to see how many points. And without trying, we were already a silver, which is pretty fun. And then integrating art was a big part of our work and working with Dad, and it still is with the artisans that are here today. This is a little rendering of the peace crane. They have a tradition that the Friends Center will do with children in San Diego. They teach them how to do origami peace cranes, to fold them, and then they send them to Japan or to Hiroshima as a peace offering once a year. So Dad designed this little sculpture peace crane, which is at their entry. So very nice symbolism. Poet John Ruskin wrote, "When love and skill work together, expect a masterpiece." I love that little quote of just how much hand touch and the little crafts that you see all around here. A lot of people ask why Dad didn't mosaic the toilets. It's actually the only thing that he didn't touch. If you come back, and we've had people, when we used to have the tours on Father's Day once a year before COVID, we would have 600 to 800 people. And people would come back 6 to 8 times. We'd say, "Why do you come back so much again?" I see something different every time, because there's so much detail that you miss coming through one time. Another fun little project is out in Elfin Forest. and they have wonderful hiking trails if you haven't been there. It's a little bit west of Escondido, in the inland. This is a rendering that we did with a living roof. And this one we use the same block that we have here at the Ilan-Lael Center. It's called the insulated concrete forms. Recycled foam blocks, they're 4 feet wide, they're 10 inches thick. And so it's pretty indestructible to fires. One of the things about, and then we've also used a sandwich panel similar to the vaults here. So these are a couple of construction photos, and those are a couple of the finished products. The building is only about 1,000 square feet because of permit regulations, but it's full of artwork. Has a mural ceiling about 4 different seasons. It's got handmade mosaic tile on the floor. Dad's studio carved a little cloud column in the front. And it has a living roof which helps filter the water before it goes back into the creek, because the creek is only about 100 feet away. And then another little fire feature is roll down shutters. They have a little bit of vandalism, so they didn't want people breaking the windows, but also those were rolled down, so if there was a fire, it's an indestructible building. We had a fun client. They wanted to call their home the Magnificent Obsession. And he wanted an adobe looking structure, and she's from Japan. She wanted a Japanese feeling. So you can see the rendering is a little bit of the Japanese side, which faces the views. It's a lot of glass and low sloped roofs. And then the back side is rounded vaults. And this is the same foam that we used for the ceilings here. And this is the more adobe sort of heavy feel for the husband. And that's a finished picture of the little roofs popping through those domes. And then the interior, when you learn to work with this foam panel, they made the chimney with the foam, they made the bathtub, the shower with the foam, and then you plastered waterproof it. And then there's a shot of their carport in the little guest house, which is on the same property. I mentioned the cedar fires, big, they were actually in 2003, so about 22 years ago. They damaged the main living structures that we lived in, up at the top. The fire came from the west, which is rare, but it blew back. It originally went all the way up to San Diego, turned around and blew back when the Santa Anas died. But this is one of the images that Dad painted. And he has a beautiful little book that I don't think I'll read, but their philosophy, if they have some out there, it's called The Shadow Side of the Moon. And Dad talks about in it how they were very sad to lose much of their personal belongings and the homes that they had lived in for 60 years. But they saw it, Dad and Mom saw it as a part of nature, the cycle of nature. And so they were able to move into the boys' house and rebuild. It took about 3 years to rebuild those structures, and those were before the center was here. But just that philosophy of really trusting nature and trusting the cycles. And one of the beautiful things that Dad writes in the poetry of the book is it was the first time he really saw the land. He saw boulders that he had never seen. So he went out and painted. He had never used black paint before. So you can see how much in the dark ochres, because like now everything's green, it just looks different, but at that time everything was black. So we've done a lot of fire rebuilds since that time, and this is a really fun one. It was an old ranchero, over 100 years old, out in Descanso, which is at the base of Cuyamaca. And you can see after the fire, all that survives was the adobe and the stone fireplace. The picture on the right then is what we rebuilt. So we were able to stabilize the adobe and use recycled lumber and rebuild the structure. And here's a couple of pictures of the same structure on the site. There were 4 different sort of haciendas on that property. So a very historic building, but using the same techniques. That one was off the grid, would have been very hard to permit, so don't tell anyone, but we didn't get permits. And then the Ilan-Lael Center, which you're in today, and I hope you enjoyed the tour. This is a watercolor rendering, sort of a bird's eye view, so you can see how much Dad's initial design sketch, how much really turned out. The original concept on the left over the Kiva part was to have a living roof. But we decided with the parapets, nobody's ever gonna see it. So we're gonna, when we can fund it, we're gonna put the solar panels up there. And then these are a couple of pictures of the foam that you can bend, and then we plaster to make the vaults. They're called a 3D panel, and well, these are the construction photos, sorry. And John, one of the wonderful workers here, he came back from Colorado to help put that together. And again, it has the ICF walls. Here's a picture from a drone looking at the center. On a clear day, you can see Volcan Mountain, and you have to come back because our rooftop deck isn't quite finished. We had a little leak and we've been repairing it. And it was a little cold to have the wine, but it's my favorite place on the whole property to have a glass of wine or a little cheese and watch the sunset across. And from up there, and you probably saw from the Boys House, another factor, a positive from the fires is a lot of the big oaks are no longer here, so the views to the ocean or to the Cuyamaca Mountains are a lot more spectacular because we have clear views now of the property. And here's here's an area view of the center. So after the fires, when we turned the property over to the foundation, we subdivided and created a separate lot. The county, by that time, I think there are 12 buildings on the property, the original property, and the county said that's probably enough buildings on one site. So this is a separate parcel, and so the center has its own land in this retreat center. And then a couple of the fun projects that we're just finishing up. This is a rendering. It's in Hidden Meadows, which is just north of Escondido. And one of the things I'm most proud about this is she got a really good deal on the lot because it had giant boulders, 20 feet tall, 20 feet wide. And there was really no place you could build that a fire truck, you could meet the code for a fire truck to access. So we were able to design around the boulders. We did have to take one big one out because we just couldn't make it work. This is a 3D rendering that we do so we can fly the owner through the building. This is a shot during construction. You can see one of the boulders inside, and then the walls and the framing starting to come up. And then talking about the art and some of the art that Dan Thorner, he's an artist that's been working with Dad for I think 15 years, and now he's the resident woodworker. So he did this beautiful door, and this just finished last month, so it's a brand new structure. That's Dan's beautiful door. And an interesting thing, you can see the little stained glass. She had a budget that she didn't want to go over. So the little design of the stained glass, she had bought hanging light from Canada, completely separate, didn't know Dan's door. She had ordered that light, and they really go together. When you see them side by side, it's really fun. These are the steps leading up. They're all flagstone leading up to that front door. And you can see one of those original boulders is on the left, and there's another one past the garage on the right. There's a shot. We did keep one of the boulders inside, which the loft, the stairs go up the side, and there's a sleeping loft. So this picture is taken on top of that boulder of the loft. We had, because of the spans, we used steel beams that were bent instead of rebar and pipes like the structures here. She has views all the way to the ocean and very fire resistive, just a beautiful home. She's still figuring out what to do with it. And then there's a shot we got on a moonlit night. So that's west facing towards the views, everything, and you can see one of the other boulders on the left. And we had to move small ones around which we could use for retaining walls. And the same concept, we used the retaining walls. The plaza is gonna be an entry space. If you were here before, we had done this grading and the parking down below, which have all come in this last year. Everybody parked randomly. They would arrive and they would get out of their car. It wasn't very aesthetically pleasing. So we now have the parking down below, and we have a nature walk if you didn't get to explore that. It's a beautiful little hike. My son Connor and other son Dylan and Teo, they're all part of doing the stonework down below. And so we've just in the last month, we created these parking stalls here. And this will be we're gonna have a concrete plaza with stones in it and a little ramp entry. So when we have larger events, this plaza will be something like you arrive in Spain at a plaza where people can sit outside and have tables, and it's not big gravel. And it'll also make it easier for accessibility, wheelchairs or walkers. And then you're saying, so that's all well and good, Drew, but what are you doing now? So we were just hired, we're working with Schmidt Design Group, which is a wonderful landscape architect firm in San Diego. They've done a lot of, just did the San Diego State Park around the new football stadium. They've done nature trails around. But up in Altadena, the Tonga, which is the native tribe of the LA Basin, we're working with them. They lost two structures. One was a stone structure in the foreground, and then the garage burned to the ground. It was wood frame. So they lost those structures, and so with Schmidt Design, we put together a conceptual plan of, they're gonna build a retreat center much smaller than we have here, but they'll have a sweat lodge, they'll have educational, and they'll have gardens where they can grow the native plants, and then share them with the native community. As you know, the white sage is a sacred plant, and I've heard in parts of California, people are going and harvesting it, so it's getting scarcer. We have a lot here, nobody's harvesting or very little. But a really fun project, and the concept of this was like the tree branches, our paths around the property will be meandering. And that one we have a lot of large boulders, so we might have to import you, Teo, up there to help on that one. And then I'm gonna finish, I just have a few more slides, and happy to answer any questions you have or have a discussion. We also want to point out, Robert Thiel, who's a good friend and an architect, he put together this photo album of the fires. It shows you how black the property was. But just interesting to thumb through and see how devastating fire can be. One of the fun things at Tonga is the site burned completely and the oaks were black. But I was up there a week later and they had rains and all the oaks were already sprouting little leaves. So the oaks sort of like the fire, and they recover unless it's really burns hot. So a little quote from my dad. I sometimes wonder that the lowly snails in their shells have such magnificent homes, while we, with our souls, so often relegate ourselves to slums and boxes. Surely our homes should attempt to rival the best our souls have to offer. It does not seem inconsistent to expect men to live in cathedrals. So not saying it's a cathedral, but the little chapel that is just over the hill, and if you want to after, you can go and sit there. It's a beautiful spot. We built that as a soil and soul project, so we had 10 architecture and art students come for a week. They camped on the land. They came up with a design and then built not all of it, but the structure, the main structure in a week. And we've also done that with Pacific Rim parks around the Pacific. And so the foundation is going to continue those movements and those traditions and try to bring more peace into the world. And you can see the beautiful reflection. So that's in the morning sun, reflecting down on the mosaic tile through the stained glass. So some of those magical things you don't get to see unless you come multiple times. I know the couple in the front, they said they've been 3 or 4 times. They said there's always something new to see. So. And then we're also feeling that this is Dad's idea and concept and the foundation is this is a place for people to create peace. And so he used to describe it as a Camp David, where people with different mindsets could come together and find peace. So his quote was, "I've always wanted the center to be used for important work, bridging differences, dreaming big dreams, or inspiring people through art and nature." So that's our goals. And then a couple of pictures of Dad, remembering him on this 1-year anniversary of him passing. And I wanted to touch on, Dad was a very shy person, especially when I was young. And most of his life was centered here on the land and building a home for the family. But he realized that wasn't enough for him, so he started to volunteer and build things. He built a school in Tijuana. Now there's multiple schools there in Colonia Esperanza. He went down, I can't believe this, for 20 years, every weekend, sometimes multiple times, he took volunteers. Every weekend for 20 years. What a commitment to those children and giving them something that they could believe in and really change their lives. And at the school, they have ballerinas that come from Moscow and have taught. They have music program that keeps the kids out of the gangs that are down there in Tijuana. So they're still taking volunteers down. So keep your eyes open on our website, and we share that information with you. And then this is the last slide. So there's our websites, and I'm going to finish with, I often do when I give a talk. First, I'm going to about the public work. Mahatma Gandhi said, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." And so Dad really tried to do that in his second half of his life, building the peace parks and the schools in Tijuana and the work in Tecate. So this is called the architecture of jubilation. It is my belief that we are passing through a gate from one age to another, perhaps more profound than the changes medieval man faced with the rising of humanism in the age we call the Renaissance. We have spent the last 500 years trying to understand the world by dividing it into parts, and we're now at the task of putting our world back together. We are seeking a vision of the whole world, with ourselves as part of the world, part of the whole. Have you ever watched millions of stars in the sky on a moonlit night, or seen the wind waver over a field of grass, or noticed the dust at play in a shaft of light, or felt the warmth of another's hand, someone you cared for? This is where architecture must come from. Architecture must take measure of all that it is to be human in the world that is whole. It must take count of our galaxy and of the smile, and somehow to learn to interpret and express with our new world the walls, doors, and roofs. It is not that economics and function are not important, but they no longer express the whole man. They no longer express who we believe ourselves to be. We must add our love, our history, our metaphysics. And we must add the wind and the sun and the call of the hills. Our buildings must learn to express all that we contain. For now we are a whole world. I have heard the astronomers talk of the music, about the music of spheres. I have heard the music described as a song of jubilation. Perhaps this is the word for our coming age, a time of coming together, a time of coming back to hold an architecture of jubilation. Thank you very much. So I love questions if you have any. Could be whatever, or if you have a comment that you want to share about coming today or being here for the first time.
I can say something.
Yeah. Tori, my older brother.
Hi, everybody. Art, beauty, nature, tenacity, vision.
vision, all these things describe my father. But the thing that describes my father to me is the love that he showed when I was young. When he took us by the hand and said, this is how you paint, this is how you mix, this is how you live. And those are the things that I want to remember from him. His wonderful work is special, but to me as a person, he was my father.
The number one question that I've gotten over the years, because we've done the tours, we started, I think, 50 years ago or more, and we started as a fundraiser for the San Diego Youth Symphony. And at that time, it was a very small tour, but all the funds went to the symphony. And at that time, they would bring some of the symphony, and they'd be on the bedroom roof of my parents' bedroom. And I remember as a little kid, the music would waffle down in here, it was just magical. But now the fundraisers are for the foundation, but I remember that. And so the main question I've gotten since about age 5 is, what is it like to grow up here? And I tell a lot of people that my brothers and I think we won the lottery. And like Tori said, not just the buildings and growing up in this art, but our parents, they're wonderful people. And then being in nature, every day. The thing I miss about living in the city in a regular house that you don't need to go out is every night we walk to the boys' house. We were out in the snow, bundled up. We're in a 50-mile-an-hour Santa Ana wind, and it was blowing you over to the pool. But you got to experience nature, and seeing the stars every night, especially up here, it's a wonderful thing.
Were there certain materials that you found as a kid you enjoyed most, that your dad would be working with?
Can everybody hear Teo? Yeah. My favorite thing as a young boy was the sand pile. So they would deliver a dump truck, a big sand pile, it's about 6 feet tall. And when it arrives, it's wet. So you could dig these tunnels through it and drive your cars. And as a kid, that was heaven. Robin.
It's just amazing how you have approached your architecture by honoring nature, but also by not moving, trees or boulders or things like that, but also being able to understand how fire in particular. So are other architects coming to you now, trying to understand how they might incorporate these principles? Because I think people are becoming more and more aware of the importance of honoring nature, but also being able to think about materials and ways of building that protect them.
Very nice comment. I'm happy to coach young architects and older architects. I have taught or consulted with them. It's a slow road, especially with some of the green materials, but I think the LA fires and with some of the foam materials that we've been using, we've started to get a few projects up there, but I'm hoping people don't just rebuild with wood, because it makes no sense, especially with our state getting more and more fire. They're going to burn, and these materials, one of the reasons we used it at Elfin Forest is the potential of flood as well as fire. We made the doors so the flood could blow through it, but the foam's if this gets wet, nothing happens to it. So yeah, we're trying to spread the word, and we also, for the San Diego Native Plant Society, we did a lecture with a native plant specialist and a chaparral specialist last month. And it was really fun because I got to learn some of the things that they say. They say one of the worst things you can do is clear your site completely, because the fire and the embers which blow in a Santa Ana, there's nothing to protect it. So they said natives, which can catch some of those embers, and then I learned this, but irrigating your natives in the dry season. A lot of times people, especially if there's a fire coming, they said if they're 50% moisture content, they're going to stop the fire. If they're completely dry, they will burn. So little tips like that sharing with a greater audience and hoping that the knowledge spreads. Yes?
It was kind of interesting that hay bales, you were making walls out of hay bales.
Yes.
And then obviously you didn't just leave them hay bales. What'd you put on the outside of them?
So we tie them together with a metal mesh, we sew it together, and then you can plaster directly onto them. So there's there's only 3 steps involved, where if you build a wood frame wall, there's 7 or 8 steps with drywall insulation. And we just had a week-long workshop in Wynola at one of the houses. So if you look on our website, we have links. They're gonna do an earth and plaster workshop next weekend at the same house, so. And it is starting to spread. We have 2 ADUs, straw bale ADUs in San Diego that are starting to be built right now.
It doesn't rot inside?
As long as you keep it dry. So it's a plaster with lime, so they actually breathe. Moisture can move in and out.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Then have you used then you were using other modular bricks? What were those made out of?
Those are recycled styrofoam from shipping and mixed with some.
Oh, styrofoam. I wasn't sure what you had
Yeah.
said.
And that's what this building is built with, so very fire resistant.
Oh, sorry, I probably asked you stuff you already said, but it's like, to be sure I understood. Thank you.
Drew, what makes you decide between using the straw bale or using something like you used here with the foam?
So a question about what determines which material is best. You know, small lot in the city, the straw bales are 2 feet wide,
Okay.
so you may not want to, but we've done them in the city. So the site, in the desert, the straw bale is amazing because of the thermal mass and the insulation value of it. We did a little guest house 20 years ago in Borrego, little wall air conditioning. In the summer, they can turn it on for about 15 minutes. It keeps the house cool all day. And it's 110 outside. And same thing in the winter. Similar in these, this one has higher ceiling, so it takes a little bit more, but we can turn the heater on and you can feel it stays warm in here. I think they had the heater on, but also our bodies are helping. So it's really that, but also the clients. Some come and they say, you know, I love the idea of straw. It's 100% natural. It's the greenest building material I know of. Besides, Adobe is right up there. But Adobe there's a lot of labor. We've done a few Adobe buildings lately, and you know, stacking all those Adobes and somebody makes them. Where straw, they're big building blocks. So we put together small homes in a weekend if you have enough people stacking.
Thank you.
So, another question about the straw. Would you like put the styrofoam bricks on the bottom, like as a seal between the dirt and the straw, and then put the straw on top?
We actually use double plates on the bottom and then gravel. So
What
it is
kind of
up
plates?
above. Pressure treated wood plates.
Oh, wooden plates. Okay.
Yeah. So same idea, but you do raise it up off the earth. Yes.
Just 2 comments on the straw bale. We were in Japan in March, this couple of months ago, and we went to Nagasaki to an area called the Dejima, and it was basically a trading area. So this is like more than 100 years before Perry opened Japan. Nagasaki had already been trading further down in the south with various European countries. And we were in a building that was built in the 1700s. That was a warehouse on the water in the Dejima,
Wow.
in the trading area. And they used straw bales. And they did, believe it or not, a truth window. I had never heard that term before.
Wow.
But they did a cutaway in the 1700s building. So it's, 300 or
Yeah.
almost 300 years old. And you could see it was kind of a mud with straw. So this is a building methodology that's been around for a
Yes.
long time, and obviously that's a warm, wet culture, and it works.
Yeah.
And the building's still there. The other comment I wanted to, our son who lives in southern Mendocino County, his neighboring ranch, young couple are building their own home, and they are using straw bale methodology there.
Yes.
And our son's ranch has got a little bit different geology, and he's been collecting lime and clay on his ranch and giving it to them because they're kind of in a or they call it pygmy forest. So the geology, the dirt consistency is a little bit different, so they
Right.
needed more of what they need. And I don't really know what all this is about, but Chris is really happy to get his digger out
Share
and
that, yeah, that's great.
cart it over. Anyway, so it's still being used in California too.
Awesome, thank you. I'll have to go visit.
Yes,
They live near,
Sea
Sea Ranch.
Ranch.
Yeah,
Our son's just a few miles from Sea Ranch.
yes.
What do you use, for the framing of your straw bales? Like, do you use, the mesh type method, or do you use a wood frame, or what do you use?
So the question was what framing is with the straw bale. The county in San Diego doesn't allow load bearing, which is all bales and you put the roof on. So we use a post and beam structure, it's like an old barn. So you're putting a 4x4 post about every 8 or 10 feet. So you're using about 50% less lumber. And then your frame is around and then you stack the bales between it and tie to it. But you do need framing like a regular stud wall at all the windows and doors. So we've used wood, but on the front center, the big church, we didn't want to cut any trees, so they used a recycled steel, like gauge steel, so that one was all metal framed. So we've done both options. Does anybody have a question for my mom? Do you have anything you want to
You
say?
have a question?
Do I have a question?
Yeah.
No, I just have a thanks.
Okay.
How did they choose this site?
Where did you decide to buy this site? Was it an advertisement in the paper? Did you go ask somebody?
By what?
Where did you find the property?
The property?
Yes.
We were just, two, late teenagers or, early 20s people, and we were just driving around the county, just looking and seeing what was here in San Diego area. And, so we drove up here, and all of this hadn't been started almost. Some people had already come here, but, you just saw all the possibilities by roaming around and seeing what was here first.
They both grew up on the East Coast, and they wanted seasons. So they told me when you drive into the San Isabel Valley, and you can see the trees on the mountain, they said, this is it, let's pick here. They bought 10 acres, nothing, there was no road, nothing, no well, $500 an acre. In 58, I think,
That's right.
1958.
That's right. You bought the property in 1958, and they bought it from Franklin Barnes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yes.
When you worked with the Buddhist group, where they had minimal funds, so they were all helping out, can you describe that process of working with volunteers versus your own hired team to build something?
Yeah, great question. One of the interesting things when we were interviewing, I went and met with the monk, and he was the senior monk, and we walked around their property, and I know a little bit about Buddhism, and I do yoga, but I didn't know about their teaching. So we would walk, and I would be talking, and he was completely quiet, and so pretty much I learned to, well, if they're not talking, I better be quiet. And then when we stopped walking, he would start talking to me. And I learned later that part of their meditation for Deer Park Monastery is walking. And so they will walk completely silent, and then the bell will ring and they'll stop. And meals as well, they don't like to talk when they're eating. So they're very mindful. But your question was more, I just wanted to share that little story. Working with them, their souls are out on, their heart is right out there. So it's so wonderful. A lot of them are small Vietnamese ladies with shaved heads, and you could see they were wearing their robes. And then the monks would come and volunteer as well. So wonderful to be able to teach them, and they were able to participate in the process of putting the bales up, but then also the earth and plaster, which is a low technology thing that you can rub the plaster on. It's a little harder to come back and finish it beautifully, which is usually professionals that know how to do it, but it was, and getting to know the nuns. They had me back later for one of their festivals and would share their food in their rooms. And I know Dad loved to work with clients from different cultures. The Doors of Abu Dhabi, if you've seen that book, 18 doors he did for a sheikh in Abu Dhabi for a palace. And those doors, he studied the methodology, he would read about them before he did anything. So they don't have any spiritual context in them because that was controversial. They're all about nature. So there are horses, there are peacocks, so fun to work in the Tonga in Los Angeles to learn their different traditions and their culture.
So can you talk a little bit about the benefits of, like, if you did a straw bale, and you're covering it with, you put the chicken wire or whatever on, and then you plaster it, what would be the benefit of that versus like doing an adobe finish on it? Or is there a benefit either to one method and the other method?
Well, the mesh, what it does for the earthquake coat, it ties the bales in, so if there was a big earthquake, they couldn't fall out. So you're tying that to the wood frame, and you're sewing it between the bales, because there's a code that says you have to connect your mesh. So if you were using earthen plaster or lime cement plaster, both would still have the mesh. We're not putting the stucco wire, so the mesh is a 2x2 little square. Stucco wire is the stuff they use in stucco, which is a lot smaller. So both systems are very similar. One is more natural material. It doesn't hold up as well, especially outside. So we are actually looking at, if you saw the main house, some of the old plaster is starting to come off the adobe. So we're experimenting with cement plaster or an adobe plaster and working with volunteers to, look at those two options and try to rebuild that. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate it.